Welcome to the Cinematic Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the most terrifying, confusing, and honestly, seemingly impossible aviation mysteries in modern history. Imagine you're on a giant, brand new airplane. The weather is completely clear, the takeoff is buttery smooth, and you're just settling in for a long, peaceful trip. But then, literally seconds into the air, the massive, roaring engines right outside your window go completely dead quiet. What happens next completely defies all logic. So let's just dive right into this. Over the blaring, screaming sounds of cockpit alarms, one pilot suddenly shouts, "Why did you turn off the engines?" And the other pilot replies, with this chilling honesty, "It wasn't me." I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. You have two highly trained pilots sitting right next to each other in a falling plane, and both are completely denying they touched the critical, life-saving switches. So the absolutely crucial point we have to figure out is, how on earth does a modern aircraft suddenly lose engine power entirely on its own? So that brings us to Section 1, 32 Seconds to Disaster. To really understand this impossible paradox, we need to rewind to the very beginning. It was a hot summer afternoon, June 12, 2025, at the airport in Ahmedabad, India. Passengers were boarding this incredibly modern Boeing 787 Dreamliner, piloted by a highly experienced crew, Captain Sumit Cyberwal and co-pilot Clive Coons. But as we know, this routine flight ended in just an unimaginable tragedy. The massive aircraft didn't just glide down, it literally fell from the sky like a heavy stone, crashing straight into a medical college hostel. In a matter of seconds, 260 people lost their lives. We're talking about excited passengers heading off to the UK and young medical students who are just sitting, studying in their rooms on the ground. Out of everyone on board that giant aircraft, there was exactly one single survivor. Just one. A 40-year-old man named Vishwash. He just happened to be sitting in seat 11A, right next to an emergency exit door, and he somehow managed to crawl out of the burning wreckage. He had boarded that plane expecting a relaxing trip home, totally unaware that he would be the only passenger left alive to tell the tale. And you know, this disaster unfolded terrifyingly fast. At 1:38 p.m., they were cleared for takeoff. The pilots pushed the speed levers forward, and the heavy plane sped down the runway. Just 3 seconds after the wheels left the ground, they were traveling at 330 kilometers per hour, already at a height of 620 feet. By all accounts, a totally perfect takeoff. But then, the countdown began. The pilots had absolutely no time to react, because exactly 32 seconds after taking off smoothly, the plane crashed. 32 seconds. That is quite literally all it took. Moving on to Section 2, the chilling audio. Now, when an airplane drops out of the sky like that, experts immediately scramble to find the black box. After hours of frantically searching through the ashes, investigators actually found it. They took the memory chip straight to a special computer laboratory, hoping they'd find, a simple broken wire or a basic error code. Instead, what they found made them absolutely freeze in their chairs. The computer data showed that the left engine lost power first, followed almost immediately by the right engine, and without that pushing power, a heavy metal airplane simply cannot stay in the air. A loud computer voice in the cockpit began screaming, "Too low terrain, too low terrain," warning them that the ground was approaching way, way too fast. Which leads us to Section 3, an impossible mechanical paradox. So why did the engines die? Well, investigators found an impossible mechanical paradox. The flight data showed that the main fuel control switches for both engines had suddenly been turned off. Think of the airplane engine like a massive fire, okay? And this switch is basically like the main water tap for your house. When the switch is on, fuel flows like water, keeping that big fire burning and the engine spinning. If you turn that switch off, the tap closes, the fire goes out instantly, and the engine dies. Pilots are strictly, and I mean strictly taught, never, ever to touch this switch mid-air unless an engine is literally catching on fire. And this brings us to a massive contradiction. It's really the core of the whole mystery. When rescue teams examined the broken pieces on the ground, they found the physical speed levers sitting in the zero power position. But the black box memory chip recorded that those exact same levers were pushed to full maximum speed right up until the very last second of the flight. The broken machine on the ground was telling a completely different story from the computer data up in the air. And to make things even crazier, the data said the fuel switches moved from on to off. If no human touched them, how does a switch turn itself off? To wrap our heads around this, we really have to look at how modern planes actually work. In very old airplanes, when a pilot pulled a lever, it literally pulled a long, thick, physical metal rope connected straight to the engine. The pilot had total manual physical control. But the modern Boeing 787 is fundamentally different. It is essentially a giant flying computer. When a pilot moves a switch today, it just sends an invisible electronic message to a computer brain, which then tells the engine what to do. And because of this fly-by-wire system, investigators are completely split right down the middle into two fiercely competing theories.
Let's look at Section 4, Theory 1, Pilot Sabotage.
Okay, let's impartially lay out the first theory, dividing the experts. Pilot sabotage. One side looks purely at the computer data, arguing that computers just do not magically flip fuel switches on their own, and concluding that a human hand had to deliberately execute this action. Back in February 2026, leaked media reports citing unnamed sources claimed that investigators from the US and Europe were examining the possibility of deliberate action. Basically, this theory suggests that the main pilot, Captain Saberwal, intentionally turned off the fuel to bring the plane down, and that the co-pilot was just simply too shocked to stop him in time. Now, as you can imagine, blaming a deceased pilot is an incredibly serious accusation. The pilots' families and a lot of other aviation experts are absolutely furious about these leaked reports. They vehemently deny this theory, claiming it's just a cover-up for a much darker truth. And that anger leads us directly into Section 5, Theory 2, the flying computer. So, could the flying computer have made a deadly error? A secret worker inside the United States government recently came forward as a whistleblower, and they claimed the Boeing 787 Dreamliner has a long history of hidden electrical problems. They claim that for years, this specific aircraft type has suffered from computer mistakes and sudden power failures, where the computer brains simply get confused. In fact, other pilots flying the 787 all around the globe have reportedly experienced the computer just turning things on and off entirely by itself. Because of this, investigators have had to seriously examine whether a sudden electrical spark or maybe a bad wire could have sent a fake shutdown message directly to the engines. And if we revisit this really haunting quote from the co-pilot, the computer malfunction theory suddenly makes terrifying sense. It perfectly explains that chilling voice recording. It explains exactly why one pilot aggressively demanded, "Why did you turn off the engines?" and why the other pilot, in his final desperate moments, honestly answered, "It wasn't me." However, we absolutely must impartially note Boeing's firm stance on this whole matter. The manufacturer insists their airplane is completely safe. They state categorically that the computer system cannot do this alone, and that a human hand absolutely had to physically move those fuel control switches. Which finally brings us to Section 6, a mystery still unsolved. So where does that actually leave us? Right now, we're basically in the middle of an intense, ugly standoff. The families are fighting tooth and nail to clear the names of the deceased pilots, while the manufacturing company is fighting to protect the reputation of its famous airplane. Meanwhile, the final official report, it's still pending. The legal dispute over who is actually to blame has escalated so dramatically that India's highest court, the Supreme Court, has officially stepped in. They are now closely monitoring the entire investigation to guarantee that the absolute truth comes out no matter who ends up getting in trouble. But for the families of the 260 victims, the passengers who were just trying to get home, the students studying in their dorms, it is just an agonizing, heartbreaking wait for justice. And that brings us right back to our final lingering question. Looking at all the evidence we've unpacked together in this explainer, the terrifying 30-second timeline, the bizarre paradox of the levers, and of course, that chilling final cockpit conversation, what do you think really happened up there? Was this a terrible, deliberate human choice? Or was it a catastrophic failure of a flying machine? The story of Flight 171 remains one of the absolute darkest mysteries in the sky, leaving us all to wonder who or what really turned off those engines.